2 decades. And so Jay and I talked about, let's combine our funds. We're going to have to go out for outside consulting services. Jay wants to do a lot of stuff in-house. I have an amazing long-range planner in-house that could do a lot of work. And so Jay and I have committed to spending time internally until January on figuring out what does the county needs are for consulting services, what are the city's needs for consulting services, drafting a scope of work together, and going out for one consultant team and their subs based on our needs. And then we have a coordinated process. We're reminded to work with each other. The jail discussion this morning is an excellent example of why, comprehensive planning is important, why coordinating with your local jurisdictions are important. And it just makes us more competitive in the future for all those fundings where it says, if you want to go after monies for this fund, where is it in your comprehensive plan? Is it just a new idea you came up with because it seems like the issue of the day, or is this something that your community has been planning for a long time, and here it is, and this is how we've outlined? So I'll stop there and let Jay.
Thanks. So as we've been talking, we realized, there's the city of Shelton's needs for a comprehensive plan, there's the county's needs for a comprehensive plan, and where they kind of overlap is some amount of Venn diagram. We're not necessarily talking about a complete joint plan where it's one integrated document, but more kind of like a good overlap, because with the UGA and with the countywide planning policies, there's a lot that needs to go into that. There's a lot of data acquisition that it makes a lot more sense to hire one consultant to come out and do it for the whole county instead of individual consultants to do portions of it, or to worse, do the exact same data collection for the county but different consultants. So that's where our audits of our internal audits of our comp plans will be useful by January, because then we can really define a scope of work, what we need, and then by the time we have the money assigned by June of next year, hopefully we'll have already issued an RFP for the services that we need. And as opposed to, and how you guys choose to administer and whatnot is going to be different than how we do it, maybe. I personally really like kind of like taking the lead on it and really dedicating myself to running the plan more as like the general contractor of building a house, controlling all the subs, as opposed to hiring a general contractor to do that. I like to be the GC for it. So, but if we organize this in the right way, we're just going to find a lot of efficiency and save a lot of money and produce a superior product, and one that's easily integratable. And so I'm really excited, and it's been great meeting and working with Kel so far, and I look forward to continuing that for the next 2.5 years of this comp plan process.
So what weight, it sounds, so comprehensive planning sounds self-explanatory, right? But this is a little bit different than what we've been accustomed to in the past with potentially, a stronger partnership. I appreciate kind of how Kel opened that up. But, between Kel and Jay, Jeff, Mark, what are the advantages that we're looking at here with this effort? What is comprehensive planning really going to mean to Shelton and Mason County moving forward? Because in the past, it just kind of seems like it's that plan that we at time to time reference, right, to fill in the blank on a grant application or something like that. But what are we really embarking on here, and what support are you going to need from us?
So I'll just start that conversation off real quick. I think in a lot of communities, not just Mason County or the city of Shelton, you complete the comprehensive plan once every 8 years or 10 years now as the legislation has changed, and then you put it on the shelf and it gathers dust. And that's, like I said, not just true for us, it's true for everybody. What I think offers the opportunity of the collaborative effort between the county and the city is that it doesn't just gather dust, it's a blueprint for how our communities are going to grow in the future, with both jurisdictions participating in that. Everybody's pulling in the same direction, which is incredibly important for grant opportunities, for asks from our state legislative partners, for other types of things that will produce the not only the economic development results, but also the better quality of life for residents of Mason County and the city of Shelton. But that's really what it is. It's a map of how we're going to get there, and it's a map that covers everything from water and sewer to roads to where the houses are gonna be, where the businesses are gonna be. It goes into every little detail, and if we do that together, I think it would be a benefit to the community as a whole.
And so yesterday, Jay was on a pre-application conference that the county held for a development proposal, kind of the beginning proposal for a mixed use of apartments and commercial space in the Shelton urban growth area. And there's some ideas on how we can get this development to occur, but currently the Mason County Shelton urban growth area development regulations wouldn't allow it. Our density is too low. No one would ever be able to pencil out a project in our UGA because it just doesn't pencil out when a developer has to bring sewer and water and all that infrastructure that doesn't currently exist. You have to have higher densities for it to pay, and that's what it was dreadfully obvious yesterday that how kind of unprepared the county is to attract that development. So, Joe, to your point, I think this collaborative effort, not only the comprehensive plan, but then after you get that updated, you work on your development regulations to make sure your development regulations are implementing what the policy and that vision you've set. And so then when that development comes in that you want to see, it's like, yep, this zoning allows you to do that, as opposed to right now, it's like we're outdated. We're 20 years old on those development regulations, and it shows.
Sounds great. This is good stuff.
And Joe, if I can add, I think the biggest thing that would help with developing a comprehensive plan from the city, county, or joint perspective is going to be vision. Because in my experience, the vision of the document always comes out some shade of beige, where we want a healthy, safe, prosperous community. Well, what does that mean? What do you want the community to look like? How do you want it to grow and evolve? Well, by the time everybody's ideas all come into the hopper and get shaken out, and nobody wants to offend anybody, and nobody really understands what the process is or can do, and it all comes out some shade of unexciting beige, and then it sits on a shelf for 8, 10, 20 years and doesn't stir the hearts of men, to use an old planning quote. And I think it's really important that we do something visionary and transformative. And if people are going to say, well, that's, how do we do that in Shelton? Well, that's up for us to figure out. We've got a lot of smart people working for us. We've got a lot of smart people as our electeds. I think it's time that we, take a moonshot and try to really help this community become the community that it wants to be. And so to summarize my request, excitement. I want excitement. If you guys can provide one thing besides money, it is excitement.
And boy, I'm so excited.
And a vision that, to help corral and shepherd and grow this community vision of what we could be. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with people since I first started working here, and one of the most telling conversations I had was with a very long-time family landowner here who owns a lot of property, and his comment was, I've always found it weird that we're a waterfront community without any waterfront access. And that is
Yes.
mind-blowing, and so that's the kind of aha moment for me that I was like, man, there's a lot we can do with this. And
There are no beaches in Shelton, and there's no burgers at Bob's. That's my new bumper sticker.
So just to kind of take my perspective for what it's worth, I think there's a lot that we can do as a vision. And if we miss the vision, at least we tried. At least it was some exciting other color instead of beige. And so that's where I hope we go jointly. Is trying to really be transformative. So.
I seriously appreciate you saying that. I still very vividly remember sitting in this exact room about a year ago doing our strategic planning retreat with the EDC, and one of the number one things that came up in our little breakout discussions is, what the hell do we want? We don't know what we want. We haven't gotten to an agreement between the county, the city, the port, the tribe, right? All these organizations that are going to craft our future. It's not that we're disagreeing, we're just not having the vision discussion.
But even individually, we're not having that. As
Right.
a council, we don't have a vision of what we look like. So
Exactly.
how do we represent?
How are we going to get anything done?
And it's super important now, because think about the westward march, the march west from the East Coast, and here it is, right? And it wasn't until I grew up on the I-5 corridor in Edmonds, and I remember what Alderwood Mall before there was no Alderwood Mall, so I remember all that growth. So now I'm over here on this side of the Puget Sound, and it's like, oh my God, they found us. Now it's continue. So whether we want the growth or not, it's going to happen. And so I think we really need to figure out what our vision is. And I love downtown railroad, you know, from the Wild Irish to, you know, we've been hitting all these spots, but it's time. Like, I feel like our time is now.
For lunch.
So.
You hit lunch.
I'm so excited for this because I'm going to send a text to former Under Sheriff Barrett, who in 2007 suggested this, and begged and begged and begged and begged for a strategic plan between the county and the city. And something that Joe brought about and you brought about is when these strategic plans, they just sat on the shelf. And somebody used the word to shepherd. It was always Jim's idea that when we set this strategic plan, that when other entities or programs come in and say, oh, we want to do this now. No, this is our plan and this is what we're going to do. We're not going to jump over here like we've been doing and go over here for a while and then, oh, we've got this idea and over there. The strategic plan allows you, as he would say is a good brain, to have focus on what you're doing and stay focused on that. I would very much agree with you and very much agree with Under Sheriff Barrett in 2007 that we continue to have these, this is a really good idea, and we go over here, and this is a really good idea, and we haven't focused those ideas as you talked about. It'd be music to his ears, but I think that's an outstanding idea or way to move forward so that when someone else comes in and wants to do something strangely on the outside, say we've set this and we get these things done, we'll look at those. We'll put them at the bottom of the list later, but it allows you to prioritize where you're going, because if you don't have an idea, like somebody said down here, of where you're going, you're never going to get there. So I think it's a great idea.
Hey, Mark,
We have
I just want to apologize to the group. The sheriff and I have a time certain meeting with the FBI coming up, so we actually have to get out of here.
It's not about you, Commissioner.
Which is too bad. I wish I could be here for the DCR conversation. Yes, please, more DCRs. So that's my vote.
I believe we have the gem in Shelton. We have the citizens. That's our biggest group of people that tell us what they want, and they have great ideas. If we can tap into more of the citizens, what they want in Shelton and the community and Mason County, it's priceless. Priceless.
So Joe, one of the things that we're not touching on though is even though we may not like it this way, this was comprehensive plan and scheme was created in a sense to keep sideboards on by entities that we may not agree with, or maybe some people do agree with. And it is meant to make sure that you don't go outside that. If you do, it gives them the ability to sue and to hold you to that scheme or not be able to build. It's not always there to open up to build. There's a lot of restrictions to say we can't do this and we can't do that, and all those must be in the comprehensive plan. Then it's put on the shelf so that they can take it off and beat us over the head with it. Well, that's the reality of it. And so when it's put together, you know, gray or tan or whatever, it's quite often done in a way to protect us from being able to be attacked. It would be nice to be able to expand however we think is possible, but there's a limit on how many homes you can have on an acre. For us at the county especially, we have a lot more because your city is an urban growth area and you have a lot more leeway where each place has something different that has a restriction put on it for the purpose of keeping it contained, whether we want it that way or not.
I think that there's a lot of coordination of the plan for how do we get infrastructure to these areas so that you can have developers that come up with these ideas that fit within the zoning side of it, but maybe it's something that we never thought about, right? Individuals that come and look at our area, if they have a clear definition of what our plan is and the area that is able to be developed, could use the property that's out here along 101 as an example. If I build this, then my expectation is that based on the plan that the city and the county have together, here's the additional development that's going to come after the fact. So I think the more 100% understand and agree with Commissioner Netherland's concerns about being too specific and then having people come back and like hold you to something that you. But I think that there's ways to set that up, and my focus is on what are those government infrastructure services? How do we coordinate and work with each other on those things? And I think there's a lot of benefit there to not only our communities and providing them with clean water and a way to process their sewage, but I think that having good roads good infrastructure there, law enforcement, and all those things. They're all pieces. Housing, it's all included within that. So coordinating those efforts together, to me, it makes sense because we get this economy of scale, right? So I often, when I worked at Thurston County, the Geographical Information Systems Department was part of my department. And we would go out for an aerial view of the county. And so we'd pay an individual to come take LiDAR photos of our county. City of Olympia, contract with that same person, pay them for it. City of Tumwater paid for it. Well, the guy did it once. He sold that same product 6 different times.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think that there's ways of how do we get together and recognize those things where we can say, hey, let's collect this data. Let's have this data available, and then we only pay for it once. So we're both entities are benefiting from that.
But there's a beauty to stretching everything you put in there. And, you know, I'm one of those, I enjoy watching us and bringing it to the greatest limit we can so we can do those developments and stuff. But it takes a lot of work, because if you do it a little bit wrong, they will use it against you. As a county commissioner, when I first got elected, everybody used to get mad. Why is the sewer only in Belfair? Why are we not going down the South Shore and the North Shore? And they just thought that's ridiculous. That he explained to them, because the law says you don't bring urban services to a rural area. Well, that doesn't make sense. That's where it needs. That's the way it is. That's not us. That's laws that are passed before he was ever in office, before any. That's just the things we have to fight and stretch. Our staff is good with being open-minded and trying to find loopholes and ways for us to get there, but there's always somebody waiting behind the wings to come down on us for it. Water is a big thing at our county. We have to constantly be very careful of what we put into our comprehensive plan so it can't be used against us to stop development.
Do you want us to talk a little bit about your annexation plans?
Yeah, so just a real quick overview. So very broadly, anything that's within our UGA, the city is able to annex. Anything that's outside, we're not. So it's kind of a bright line. We can't go outside the UGA. But at the moment, we have one annexation underway. It is, I believe, expanded to 395 acres on the east side of Olympic College, kind of running up toward the north. And we've been working with the prospective developer on that annexation. It's expected to produce roughly 1,200 new homes over a 10-year period. We're not going to get all 1,200 right away. That would be one huge construction project. But that's what we're looking at in that area. The council has already approved the 10% petition resolution, and we expect the 60% petition ordinance to come back to council's review in probably February, perhaps March of next year. And at that point, it'll be annexed, and we'll work with the county auditor and everybody to certify that, and then the development process can begin. But like I said, that will take several years before you'll see a rooftop come out of the ground on that site, and then probably a 10-year build out. As far as other areas in the UGA, we are looking at various areas, but there are no concrete plans yet. And we're talking with various partners in the community about what that might look like for them, and how we can help make that happen if that's something they're interested in doing.
I think that's exciting.
Yeah. Where do you think so the way I look at it is that this is the area that's currently just got logged.
Mm-hmm.
Most likely was designated forest lands prior to it. Now it's turning into city.
That's not the area though.
So it's the area that just got logged, I believe, is Olympic.
That's
Olympic
College
College
property.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is behind that.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's behind the area.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Right behind my house.
Yeah. So we're evaluating other opportunities in the UGA if the people that own the property are interested in doing that. Won't ever be a forced process. It can't be, except in very specific circumstances, which none of those occur here now that I'm aware of. The one island we have, but that's not something that we're looking at immediately either.
And the only other case would be if they have consented to, they've sought out city services, water, sewer,
Right.
further out in the UGA, they had to sign a no protest agreement that if there is an annexation, they can fight that essentially. But we haven't, you know, to my knowledge, created a plan to like start scooping these up or anything like that. So
Not at the moment.
It's
Do
like
you know
the-
what Olympic College is, sorry.
You're fine.
Do you know what Olympic College is planning to do with the property that they just logged?
From my understanding,
Nothing.
a lot of that was for portables for Cedar High School, in cooperation with the Shelton School District. And some of it, if I remember right, in the midst of time was for safety reasons. Didn't want trees coming down on top of those portals on a day like this.
Oh, I can tell you, I walked out there
Yeah.
and had trees fall down as I was walking on the sidewalk, but, yeah.
Turn around and go the other way.
Right. I wonder where all that water is gonna go.
Yes, in Mason County.
So that's kind of where we're at now, so.
Similar to Commissioner Trask, yeah, I'm giddy, right? It's development, right? And it's interesting, rooftops especially, you know, it's beneficial, it can be beneficial to the school districts, can be beneficial to the city. At the same time, I'm not gonna lie, I am kind of concerned. It's a lot of development in a constant, you know, it's a lot of development, it's new. I'm not confident that the way our impact fees and general facilities charges are structured today, that financially the city's gonna be, you know, in a solid position at the build out of that. So we're gonna learn a lot through this process, and I am encouraged through our conversations on partnerships and other things like that, that you're gonna learn a lot too, vis-a-vis the city on this as well. So it'll be interesting to see what those impacts ultimately look like. It'll be kind of the first evolution that I'll have experience on on the council, hopefully, to see really now when we talk about impact fees and those types of charges and things like that that we attribute to growth and development. It'll be interesting to see how that kind of pans out. I know your welfare development, another thing that we're watching closely to see how that kind of pans out for the long term. But you know, at the end of the day, you know, while development is good, it kind of needs to be well planned and thoughtful. And you know, like I said, I'm hopeful that this is all going to be great. But yeah, also somewhat concerned that we're not, you know, giving up, you know, a ton and then putting a lot of that impact on the backs of the existing residents and businesses in our community. So it'll be fun to see how this all goes. But yeah, looking forward to a successful outcome. For sure.
And then the other partners that are involved, like the PUDs
Right.
and Comcast or whoever. Yeah, fire.
Yeah, fire.
Yeah.
Jeff, what about sewer expansion?
So sewer, discussion of sewer opportunities, I think I've mentioned publicly before, and I think I mentioned to this group, that one of the things that we are working toward over a 20-year time horizon is expansion of the satellite treatment plant out here next to the port property, just south of the port property. We want to eventually get away from discharge to Oakland Bay, because the regulations and requirements for continued discharge to Oakland Bay are not going to get any easier. And I think even more importantly, we want to be able to help our shellfish growers and our tribal partners to continue to maintain their industry and their interest in that particular on that particular focus. So we're really focused on transitioning all of our sewer to the satellite treatment plant over time. We are in the middle of a property purchase that will allow us to put in a large pump station to get basically the entire city pumped up to the satellite plant. But with that, we need some additional property and particularly some additional funding, because the membrane bioreactors is what we use are very expensive pieces of equipment, and like anything, the cost of that will go down over time. But at the moment, we are focused on securing additional property. So we'll be talking with the port shortly about additional property next to the existing satellite treatment plant, so that we can extend and replicate what we already have further. A big part of that is providing all the treatment capacity that's necessary for the industrial land here to develop. The industrial land will produce living wage jobs for people in our community and move forward with productive industrial and commercial development in this corridor if we can get that capacity extended, which I think we will. We've been working on that pretty hard for quite a while, and it'll go along with the latecomers agreement that we were lucky enough to have a partnership with the state legislature on to get that get those requirements removed for the property adjacent to the current water line. Reclaimed water is also a big deal, and I think that also helps our tribal partners because we replenish the aquifer, we increase the stream flows in the creeks that support salmon and the health of Oakland Bay. So that's kind of the direction the city's moving in. It's not inexpensive by any means, and it's a very long time frame, but I think overall, long term for this community, it's the right way to go and the right way to do it.
I'm not familiar with the satellite facility. Do you land apply? Or do you have a lagoon? How does that? How do you? And where's your land? Your field?
The spray field is not too far from there. We would expand that. Actually, I think it's right out here. And there would not be a lagoon because, as we all know, lagoons attract birds, and birds and planes don't necessarily mix. So we would keep it away from the lagoon style, but it would all be land apply. And we think that at least we've had indications that we'll receive a letter of support from the tribes in order to do this because they're very supportive of it as well. And we want to help them reach their goals also with increased stream flows and those types of things. We'll be submitting that to our state delegation at their send-off hopefully in January, if not before. And then we'll be working on that. It's one of our higher priorities along with water storage capacity. It's another one of our priorities for continued growth in the city.
Injection wells and spray fields would eliminate putting any influent out in the bay, which could open up also closed areas for shellfish.
Eventually.
Eventually, yeah.
The thing that, the timing on that is incredibly important because not only the life cycle of the asset, the sewer treatment plant down in Oakland Bay, but also the debt that was incurred to do that. So the timing of that transition is going to be incredibly important. We don't want to ask our community to pay for an asset that they're no longer using. So that timing aspect is very important.
Any other questions on this topic? Well, seeing none, this is a late one that we put on there, but I thought it was really appropriate to sit down and talk about. There's been some discussion about designated crisis responders, and I think that there was some information going out about the county and whether we support it or not. So I brought Dave Wyndham to make sure that we were all clear on what does that look like, and maybe give just a general overview of what that resource would do, and then what is the city planning on doing, and how can the county help participate? So Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about
So DCRs, we're certainly supportive of DCR. One of the problems we have right now is that in many ways, this is just one of them. Sure. Thurston County gets the cookie, we get the crumbs. And it happens with many things. In DCRs, it's the same thing. So when we have DCR that comes out of Thurston County, and we say, hey, we have somebody who's having a problem, they're on the sidewalk and they're crying and they're just completely irrational, and the DCR is already in Thurston County talking to somebody who wants to jump off a bridge, we're not going to get that service. So our approach is to get somebody dedicated to Mason County, specifically around Shelton. And we've been doing some research this week, and we found it sounds like that asset would have to live at ORS, which is the Olympic Area Recovery Services. The purpose of a DCR is to make that evaluation of who needs involuntary commitment. And right now, when you have to wait hours, sometimes days to get somebody over from Thurston County, crises go up, they come down, and then who deals with that person in the meantime? So is it at the jail? Is it the sheriff's office sitting in the patrol car? Is it the city? Is it the hospital? You know, in a 23-hour bed at the hospital. So we're looking to bring that resource here and have it available. You know, there is plenty of work for someone to be here working locally. I mean, all you have to do is drive around and talk to the local businesses, talk to the people on the street, talk to Community Lifeline. We definitely need that resource here in town, and it's time to bring that level of service to Mason County.
So Jeff, the city actually applied for some funding for that?
So the Association of Washington Cities had a grant opportunity that they sent out, and I know several members of your team saw it and made sure they brought it to our attention. In conjunction with that, as many of you are aware, we had a homelessness task force that convened over the summer. And one of the recommendations that came out of that task force was for a designated crisis responder, or a DCR. So when the grant opportunity from AWC came out, we put together a request for that DCR. And really what it is a year-long program to gather data for long-term decision-making at the state legislative level to see if this is a program that is worth funding. So our plan, should we be successful in that grant application, I should know before Thanksgiving, before the end of this month, whether we'll be successful or not, is to partner with Mason Health, who I've already reached out to, because the DCR has to be associated with a medical facility, so Mason Health or ORS or any of the others. And to provide that service here in our community, and it wouldn't just be limited to Shelton, we would certainly partner with the county for their needs as well, but that funding is only for a year, and just to see if that would be an effective use of resources to address the issues that we're seeing fairly frequently in our community. So we'll find out if we're successful with that grant application, and then we'll go from there.
Is this a resource that could be coordinated with law enforcement?
It is. So the alternative response team, it needs to be a team, and that's something that the chief and I have talked about, is not necessarily in the police car, but certainly responding as a team to a crisis situation. And we'll see if it works. That was a recommendation from the homelessness task force, so we wanted to make sure we pursued it.
I think it's extremely important that we have a DCR here in Shelton. I've been downtown where there's been somebody in crisis, and 4 hours later when they show up, person's just sitting there, DCR leaves. Recently, a county employee hounded them, and somebody finally showed up and actually saw crisis happening, and that person that has been in crisis on and off for months was involuntarily committed and probably will never come back. I mean, will probably be taken care of the rest of his life. So
But it took much too long.
it took much too long for that to happen, and kudos for the county for staying on them on a daily basis is what I hear. So.
Well, obviously our crews are impacted constantly by this, our EMS crews, and the biggest challenge that we face, besides the lack of in-field DCR response, is even once the decision has been made that this individual needs help, it's where do we go? And Mason General's ability to handle that is extremely limited. What ends up happening a lot of times is my EMS crews end up hospital shopping, and they can be calling all over the area, Thurston County, Kitsap County, and they're lucky, honestly, sometimes to find a facility that will take this individual, generally for pre-medical clearance and then beyond. And so does that grant have anything to do with housing of these individuals? The ones that once are medically cleared but they need help, obviously?
Yeah, I think one of the things this grant is intended to do, and this wasn't an express stated purpose of it, is to expose where the cracks are. And that is where, what I've heard anecdotally, where the cracks are. When you can get a DCR and they are lucky enough to time it in conjunction with someone that's actually in crisis at the moment and not doing this that David mentioned.
Yeah. And I think the other piece to that is it's not just the DCR. I think you need to have that in conjunction with the case manager, because I don't think the DCR's role they should be doing the evaluation, but finding that facility, finding that place for the person to go next, that's really more along the lines of somebody else to do.
Yeah,
because there's enough work for them to do just in the evaluation and making those determinations.
We've had talks with our medical program director, Dr. Joe Hoffman, and at the EMS Council. This has been going on the last couple of years as this problem continues to increase, where if we had a intake facility, we could write protocols where our EMS field providers could do medical clearance in the field, because currently that's not something we can do. If a patient needs medical clearance of any type, it has to be done at an emergency facility. And so hence this problem just continues to perpetuate itself. Whereas if we could do that in the field, having a place that could take them, that would take the pressure off the hospital, and it would just be part of the overall care system for these individuals.
To that point, your first responders end up having to stay with that person until you can find a suitable place for them. And if you're hospital shopping and you have to go to other counties in order to find someone, that's somebody that's not responding to calls for service. And to piggyback on that, those same persons, your point is very well taken, that if a person's in crisis and we simply get them out of crisis and put them back out there without any kind of resources, they ultimately end up back in crisis again, and it's this revolving door of the same folks utilizing services and taking up an inordinate amount of time trying to get them the help that they need, but it's not consistent help, so that cycle continues, and we see the same people over and over again. And it gets to a point sometimes that these people get to be so well known in that crisis that even places that have those beds are like, oh, I'm not taking that person. But it's because we're doing a terrible job of helping people manage so they don't end up in crisis again.
And it's hard on all the first responders, because when you have a person that you obviously know needs help, but they don't meet the medical criteria based on what the chief is saying, that the ER is going to accept them, and a DCR doesn't get involved and there's no place to take them, where do we leave them? We leave them on the street. And we have no choice in that matter. And so it's difficult not only for the individual not getting the help, but it's hard on the first responders as human beings that have to make those decisions when their hands are just tied.
And then it's hard on the community that's dealing with that.
It is.
I mean, I've been under the impression that when a DCR does come and somebody is in crisis, they do find somewhere for them to go.
Right. Well, not always, no.
But,
They try.
They try.
do.
Sometimes it takes several days for them to try to find that resource. And in the meantime, if they're not in a facility where they're locked down, a lot of times they just take off into the community and the cycle starts over again.
And a lot of these folks end up at Community Lifeline, and then we don't have facilities there to take care of them medically or psychologically, and then they're back on the street. And then so we're frustrated, EMS is frustrated, law enforcement is frustrated, and it's the same people, right? So there needs to be more than just, there needs to be another type of shelter that's not just homelessness, but maybe a respite or some place where they can chill out until we can find some place for these folks to go, instead of just wandering the streets or wandering the parks or wandering the, the doorways of everyone's business. So I think this is a huger problem than just getting a DCR. It's like, even if we have the DCR, where do these folks go? So, and long term, and not just shuffling them from one hospital to another and then ending up on our door because that was their last known residence. And they're literally dumped on the doorstep downtown, and that we can't even bring them inside because we don't have the capacity or the money to be a 24-hour shelter. So this is a huger problem than just getting a DCR.
No, this is definitely a state issue.
Yeah.
There's a great article out, I believe it's Inslee's Fix to Western State, and they're going to create 500 beds, 500 more beds, but none of it helps us. It's basically through the courts. I mean, none of it helps involuntary commitment or voluntary commitment. So it's a great article. This is a Seattle Times article. It's from March.
One of the things that we did in Ponderay County to kind of stem the flow, it'd be nice to turn the tap down, was to put people at the hospital to get people back out of the ER and back into clinical settings, where oftentimes they've been fired. They come into a clinical setting, they're difficult. The clinic fires them. Now they're out. They have no place else to go, so they overutilize the ER, or EMS takes them to the ER. So one of the things that we did there was to have people at the hospital co-attached to the emergency room to start working people out of the emergency system and into clinical care. And if you do that, it's cost effective. It saves the hospital. I think we invested $160,000, and we saved the hospital $660,000 in the first year of unreimbursed charity care. So there's I think like Miguel was saying, there's multiple things we need to put into place. It's not just dealing with the crisis now. How do we turn down the volume a little bit of people who are going into crisis? So
one of the options just got closed over at St. Michael's too, so we can't even go North Mason Kitsap right now because they're having a huge issue with they're calling 911. The ER is calling 911 to get help with their ER services. So this is a huge problem that is not being funded or being looked at appropriately. That's my opinion.
But all this being said, obviously this is a huge problem at multiple levels. Absolutely, we could use DCR services here in Mason County.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we do.
It's each piece.
Yeah.
Well, not a question. I'm trying to stay silent because this really isn't my meeting, it's your meeting. But I urge you to think big. A designated crisis receiving facility, since you're planning and that sort of thing, in Mason County would help all fire, police. It would help everyone have 3 days. That 72-hour hold where they're in a therapeutic setting, they can start in. I hear you loud and clear. We have to scrap the system and rebuild a mental and substance abuse system from the ground up. I mean, we have to. But I think community setting crisis receiving facility is where all of us should start. And I encourage you all to think big. On this, if we don't start making significant progress, I think the number is, for every one person we help in Washington State, 25 more people get into either a mental or substance abuse problem. Let's fix it in Mason County the Mason County way. We don't have to wait for the state. Ask for help. I'm going to work all I can do to convince my colleagues in Olympia that we have to scrap the system and build a new one. But think big. Really think big. Because, the people that need us the most are the ones that we're talking about here. Anyway, thank you. That's all I have to say.
I appreciate that. The telecare facility downtown was meant to be was pitched to be a Thurston Mason County facility, and it's not. It's a statewide facility, and I understand that it's got quite a few people from out of the area in there.
But a designated crisis receiving facility is totally different. These are people that are having a mental health break with reality, or a substance abuse break. They are the most challenging patients to deal with. It frees up law enforcement and fire to go out and help the next person. It also puts them in a therapeutic setting that is designed and trained and staffed to take care of it.
So is that partnering with like an OHR?
Yeah, it is. It's there are service providers out there. The state is looking and has freed up quite a bit of funds for the construction and the operation of such facilities. So think big on that. Ask for it.
And do we have a breakdown on costs?
Yeah, it's expensive. It's not cheap, but again, the one, I think we did it in Linwood, I don't remember. There's 2 facilities running in the state of Washington that are designated crisis receiving facilities, and I will try to get you all some information.
So I can maybe talk a little bit about that. So over the summer, first off, I want to say this is a super important conversation. Yeah. This is another one, much like the jail, that it's going to require action. But we want to make sure that the action is targeted and it's the right action. And so I want to maybe just address the DCR term first. So designated crisis responder, it sounds like those are all 3 things. Those 3 words are something that we need. But a DCR is specifically called out in statute and has a specific role, and that is to get somebody involuntarily committed into the ITA process. And that's a civil commitment court process that they have to go through. And so when we're talking about a designated crisis responder, we're using it like Kleenex and tissue. What we're really, I think, talking about is having a continuum of crisis care and response that pairs the right level of credentialed person with the issue at hand. And so we're looking at mobile outreach teams, most mobile crisis teams, perhaps that are embedded with law enforcement. Not that they ride in the car anymore, but that are, that are working hand in hand, with law enforcement and are co-responding to those crisis issues and are focused on, they can have a DCR attached to them. That helps with the evaluation if somebody does meet the statutory requirement for involuntary commitment. But it's also providing that peer support, which is a drive from the state and healthcare authority, which, peers are people who have certifications based on their lived experience that help individuals in crisis or substance use navigate the system. So there's a case management component to it that's working on things like finding, mental, or not just mental health resources, but physical health and housing and, the whole continuum there. And so that's, I think, maybe just for some clarity on when we're talking about designated crisis responders, we're talking about a much bigger continuum of care versus this actually very specific function in state law. That said, having a voluntary facility is something that we ought to be considering, and we have to balance that with, how many people would we need to have in that facility? They're capped at 16 beds under federal law that you can have in a crisis response facility, and so maybe there's you lack some economies of scale with that, so you have to keep those beds filled, year round in order for a private provider, in order, to make it pencil for them. And so one of the facilities I think Dan might be talking about is a facility in Spokane, which is a true drop and go law enforcement EMS voluntary facility. But what they've done is they've blended their model in order to make it pencil for medical care and all the other elements that you need to run a facility like that, where they have a detox. They have 16 detox beds and 16 co-occurring substance use and mental health beds in order to kind of make that system work for them. The challenge is we can get the capital funding. The legislature has done a lot of great work on providing capital funding, but it's finding a partner on the provider side who's willing to do a voluntary facility because the reimbursement rates are lagging for those beds, and then there's also just sort of this, just sort of the way the model is set up financially, it doesn't always work, and so we have to be looking at, like Dan said, I think, do look big and look at how we're blending services in a facility like that so that it can be sustainable. I would also, I think, for a future meeting like this, because this isn't something that we're going to solve here, I think it's absolutely critical that we have Olympic Health and Recovery Services, the Thurston Mason DHASO, present on the services that they are providing. I think we've come a long way from where we were under the regional service network model, which we're now on our third model that has come into place in the past decade. From a regional service network that was solely under Thurston County, and we were contracted with them to receive funding and services, to the behavioral health organization model, which gave the Thurston Mason Behavioral Health Organization $60 million of flexible funding to put into these gaps that was directed to Medicaid spending, and now we're under the BHASO, the Administrative Service Organization model, where that has now been shifted to managed care organizations. So your Medicaid providers, insurance providers manage the lion's share of those funding, and so our region went from having about $60 million in flexible funding down to about $10 million, essentially overnight. And this has been a push at the legislature, predates Dan, predates our delegation. It's been in the works for a number of years, and a lot of other regions were early adopters, and we held on to the very last minute to switch over because we wanted to make sure that we were having more of a say in how those funds were deployed in our communities. And so, yeah, we need to have a holistic approach, but we also have to look at who's not at the table. And under the model that we have given to us by the state, the only place that provides designated crisis responder services is Olympic Health and Recovery Services through the Thurston Mason DHASO. And so if we're going to talk about this, if we're going to build programming, let's look at the models that they have in place that are working in Thurston County and see what we can bring here. See what we can do to leverage our treatment sales tax, their Medicaid reimbursement abilities, and build a program that would work. I don't think they participated in the homeless task force where this recommendation came from, and so just sort of acknowledging that maybe there's a knowledge gap on some of this stuff, given how complex of an issue it is. I think we would all benefit from bringing them in to do a presentation to our council and commission.
So Kevin, economy of scale is something that's on the bottom of everything we do to be able to try and make it work. You mentioned the Spokane with the 16 beds in one and 16 beds in another modality. Does that allow them to have it larger, or are they considered the same thing, just in a location that's got separate pods?
It's one facility, but where you get the benefit is you're sharing one medical team, which is a huge cost driver of it. And so when I don't have enough people in my crisis stabilization beds, maybe I'm full on the detox side or the co-occurring side, and so I'm able to continue to pull in those funding resources to keep my staffing. And so that's that blended model. When we visited there from the BHASO in August, we came back and talked about it at that board, and we were evaluating what that might look like in our region, in particular in Mason County, because we were considering going for the funding that the legislature approved on the capital side. Even though we didn't have a partner identified, we were considering going for the facility funding. Our conversations there and our sort of evaluation of it was that we would need to have between 1,100 and 1,500 people go through that facility every year in order for that to pencil for a provider. Part of it is we're not convinced that we have 1,500 people in our community that would be there for a 3 to 5 day stay voluntarily, enough to sort of keep that business model afloat. And so the concern then would be, okay, where are we pulling people who are coming into a voluntary facility? Where are they coming from if we can't meet that 1,100 to 1,500 number in Mason County? And so certainly because we're in the region with Thurston County, they would bring folks here. But you would also be having probably people from Kitsap and Grays Harbor, because we have so few voluntary beds in our state. The lion's share is the involuntary commitment beds. And so, having that, that's a bigger community conversation. If we cited a facility here, what's our comfort level with, bringing folks into this community who are in crisis, who could leave at any time, and maybe not go back to the community in which they came from. We already have to continue to talk with Telecare and make sure that when folks are released from the involuntary treatment facility, that they're exhausting every effort to get them back to their home if they're not from here. So on a voluntary level, that problem just becomes even more critical to address. And so, I think we just have to go into it eyes wide open as to what the community's tolerance for that kind of a situation might be, even beyond funding it from a capital or operations standpoint.
So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I feel like Jeff and I have some homework to do where we can get together and coordinate some of these discussions. Potentially even set up a special meeting where the council and the commissioners can hear a presentation from BHO or ASO and the services that they provide, and maybe even some ideas for path forwards there, because I definitely hear that as a major meeting. I also feel very strongly that I've heard a consistent message about how do we handle jail in the future. So what are we going to do? And we need to come up with a plan, and we need to get started on it sooner rather than later. So that's something else that I think Jeff and I can get together and start talking about. What are those next steps? I have a ton of information. I've got file folders full of research and reports, and maybe sitting down talking with commissioners about Chief Adams' idea about the vendorship's idea about getting together a committee with the kind of discuss some of that. So definitely interested in my commissioner's opinion associated with what does that look like, and then if we could coordinate that with the city too, I think that would be super positive.
Yeah. No, I think that you and I can get together in the next 2 or 3 weeks, maybe just after Thanksgiving, depending on how things play out, and kind of put some framework around these discussions and bring it back to our respective elected officials and see how we're going to move forward with some options.
I agree. Thank you all for participating. Sorry we had a little technical difficulty this morning, and I wish you luck traveling back to your car.
I just dried off.
Hopefully, we wish you luck.
Thank you, everybody.